The story begins with a red building standing out against an equally crimson sky. Facing a purple monster with its brain exposed, the protagonist, Kwon Su-hyeok, prepares for the confrontation. In the blink of an eye, a system message appears, introducing him to the community of the dead, as he faces the monsters with his shining axe. With a purple concentration of energy in his weapon, Su-hyeok delivers a devastating blow to the monster. Despite his determination to annihilate his enemies, his resilience eventually gives way, and he falls exhausted, still wearing a resilient smile. The online audience, cheering for him, expresses support and concern, begging him to rise and continue fighting. However, amidst this, a system message introduces a new figure, Ha-hee-young, a young woman with brown hair who somehow seems connected to Su-hyeok. Urgently, she tries to share vital information, while the protagonist initially responds with skepticism and disdain. Yet, her persistence captures his attention, and he listens as she lists 3 crucial rules: not to open the status window, to make contracts with the worst gods up to the 6th floor, and always wield a weapon when awakening abilities. Su-hyeok's suspicion is palpable, but Ha-hee-young reinforces the seriousness of the information and warns that the Tower of Provocations will soon materialize on Earth. Through gestures, she tries to communicate something, but is interrupted by a sudden brightness that envelopes them, leaving them perplexed. The system emits messages of changes in the tower, indicating an imminent transformation. Su-hyeok is teleported once again to an unknown environment, facing a choice: to select a weapon and open his status window. But he hesitates, recalling Hee-jung's words. Choosing a rusty sword, he ignores the countdown urging him to open the status window. Quickly, he is teleported once more to the tower, but this time, to a dark and uncertain place. Confronting an unexpected challenge, Su-hyeok acts on instinct, attacking, stumbling, and recovering with a start. He realizes the need for more caution when wielding his sword. Suddenly, a figure emerges from the shadows, an assassin goblin, a formidable enemy with a dagger and a threatening gaze. Su-hyeok quickly devises a strategy, deciding to create distance to assess the opponent. However, the goblin acts unpredictably and throws a dagger using a crossbow. Su-hyeok perceives the imminent threat and rushes toward the enemy to prevent the crossbow from firing. The goblin boasts, mocking Su-hyeok's luck in escaping the secret attack. Determined, Su-hyeok engages the goblin in a tough battle. Even injured by the poison of the dagger, he doesn't give up. After an intense fight, Su-hyeok finally triumphs over the assassin goblin. With the enemy defeated, he picks up the dagger, not wanting to leave anything to chance. However, a wave of dizziness hits him. Su-hyeok realizes that the dagger is poisoned, and he falls, struggling to maintain consciousness. Fighting against the effects of the poison, he contemplates the situation and wonders about the meaning of Hee-jung's words. The red messages from the system flickered in his mind, bringing forth the outcomes of the protagonist's actions. The scene was almost surreal. Su-hyeok rose from the ground, still dazed from the intense battle. The head of the slain goblin was separated from its body, a testimony to the fierce fight that had taken place there. His gaze fixed on the clock that now displayed the message: kill all enemies, time limit 11 hours and 57 minutes. He realized he had been unconscious for about 5 hours. With a serious expression, he stowed the poisoned dagger of the goblin in his utility belt, along with the crossbow. The need to keep moving forward propelled him, and he entered the dark and mysterious cave. But before he could advance much, a new threat materialized. An attack, stealthy and treacherous, emerged from the shadows towards him. However, this time, Su-hyeok's experience and caution helped him dodge the blow. His body moved almost automatically, skillfully evading with agility. He realized, amazed, that avoiding this attack was easier this time. His body seemed to have internalized the previous experience, and his reflexes were sharpening rapidly. A smile of self-confidence crossed his face as he set his sword down, and the ground reacted, momentarily glowing beneath his feet. With a smile on his lips, Su-hyeok ceased his evasive maneuvers and, as he looked to a corner of the cave, he noticed the presence of 2 goblins. They were distracted and hadn't yet noticed his arrival. He quickly assessed the situation and formulated a plan: to kill one of them first and then confront the other in direct combat. He took the crossbow from the slain goblin and prepared a shot, but before he could fire, a sense of alarm ran through his body. A stealthy attack from behind, the same trick used before, was about to hit him. He turned in time and dodged the attack, escaping the trap. The 2 goblins, now aware of his presence, looked at him with red eyes and a palpable thirst for blood. The system identified them as a goblin couple, a man and a woman. As they prepared to attack, Su-hyeok remembered past relationships and how his own love life had once been a significant part of his identity. Amid his thoughts, he decided to focus on the battle before him. With a calculated movement, he attacked the male goblin, cleaving him in half with a precise swing of his sword. The female goblin cried and screamed for her deceased boyfriend, and a wave of irritation coursed through Su-hyeok. He had experienced this kind of pain before, and now he was the one inflicting this suffering. Fueled by her rage, the female goblin charged at him with fierce determination. Su-hyeok confronted her head-on, his sword cutting through the air with precision. He didn't hesitate to face his enemy, confidently declaring that being single was better than being part of a couple. His strike was accurate, and the head of the female goblin rolled on the ground as she lamented her failure to avenge her boyfriend. Before he could catch his breath, a rain of arrows hit the ground behind him. Su-hyeok turned to face the shooter, questioning their cowardice for attacking from behind. The shooter emerged from the shadows, revealing themselves as a young goblin. The young goblin pleaded for their life, crying and begging. The protagonist, more experienced and perhaps even a bit wiser, decided to give them a chance. He proposed a trade, the life of the young goblin in exchange for an answer to a question. The goblin readily agreed, and Su-hyeok, with a subtle smile, questioned them about the monster's intentions. The goblin explained that they were just fulfilling their duty, and Su-hyeok realized that the situation was more complex than he had imagined. The goblin begged him to believe in the sincerity of their words, and touched by the genuineness in their eyes, Su-hyeok decided to spare them. The system recorded this act as the rescue of the young goblin, revealing a hidden mission centered around understanding the goblin's sufferings. As the young goblin smiled with relief and gratitude, Su-hyeok delved into deep reflection. Ha-hee-young, in a similar setting, finds herself surrounded by 3 goblins. Her expression reveals concern and a touch of fear as she battles against the numerical odds. She reflects on her choice not to select the status window during the tutorial and realizes that it has brought significant changes to her experience. She feels the absence of the protagonist's help and wishes for him to be well, facing the challenges the tower presents. With determination, Ha-hee-young conjures the magic called Fire Command using her staff. A fireball appears in her hand, and she hurls it accurately towards the goblins. The fire flashes and engulfs the enemies, creating a spectacle of flames and smoke. Meanwhile, Su-hyeok continues his conversation with Dabi, the child goblin who is now tied up. The conditions are simple: Su-hyeok will tie his hands, and Dabi has no choice but to accept. Dabi agrees, albeit begrudgingly, calling Su-hyeok stupid but also generous. The protagonist feels offended by the nickname and threatens to kill him, but Dabi immediately cries and apologizes. The tense atmosphere dissolves into playful banter, with Su-hyeok teasing the goblin as they search for a rope. When they find one, Su-hyeok ties Dabi's hands, and Dabi protests in a hilarious manner. The situation soon turns into an almost comical scene, with Dabi overreacting to each of Su-hyeok's actions. However, the situation takes a serious turn when Su-hyeok notices a shining light on Dabi's chest. Intrigued, he tries to grab the jewel from the goblin, but Dabi panics, pleading for him not to do it. He claims that the jewel is valuable and that it could pay for the fact that Su-hyeok spared his life. Tension rises as Dabi cries and begs, but Su-hyeok insists on taking the jewel. When Su-hyeok finally takes the jewel, the necklace seems to resist his efforts. Dabi is in complete despair, screaming "no" in anguish. The protagonist realizes that this jewel holds some kind of mysterious secret, a mystery that seems to be deeper than he had imagined. As the two continue walking through the cave, Dabi reveals a surprising ability, the ability to see perfectly in the dark. Su-hyeok, incredulous, questions how he can do that. Dabi, innocently, responds with a dose of self-confidence, leaving Su-hyeok even more impressed and puzzled. With Dabi's help, Su-hyeok becomes more confident and secure when facing traps and enemies. He learns how to deflect arrows with his sword and further enhances his agility and dexterity. He realizes how each movement enhances his reflexes and reactions, allowing him to become even more effective in combat. Dabi expresses surprise at the protagonist's abilities, and Su-hyeok jokes about how he is the hope of humanity. This peculiar and amusing relationship continues as they advance, with Dabi warning about dangers and potential enemies. Finally, the pair of unexpected allies come across a massive door, locked before them. A sense of accomplishment surrounds them as they realize they stand before the confrontation with the boss of the first floor. The protagonist, Su-hyeok, couldn't help but question Dabi about what lay behind the imposing door in front of them. Dabi admits not knowing, which leads Su-hyeok to express suspicions about the situation. Dabi responds with frustration, stating that Su-hyeok never believes him. Despite this, Su-hyeok decides to trust him and, with a mix of nervousness and determination, places his hand on the doorknob. The moment Su-hyeok's hand touches the doorknob, they are suddenly teleported to a majestic room. The mission is clear: eliminate all remaining enemies within a limited time of 6 hours and 58 minutes. The new room is surrounded by a volcanic environment, with a scarlet sky and walls that appear to flow like lava. In front of them stand 7 warrior goblins, all wielding swords, along with 2 assassin goblins with crossbows. The situation is alarming for Su-hyeok, who has faced tough challenges so far but is now confronted with a much larger group and an imposing figure in armor. Dabi starts crying again, expressing discomfort with the heat and hostile environment. Su-hyeok, though apprehensive, tries to reassure him, assuring that he can defeat the goblins. Su-hyeok moves forward, wielding his sword and crossbow. He attacks the goblins fervently, taking them down one by one. However, even with his combat skills, the armored goblin remains unfazed. Su-hyeok observes this mysterious figure, curious about the reason he's not moving. Giving a kick to one of the goblins, Su-hyeok sends it into the lava flowing on the floor. He continues to fight fiercely, attacking every goblin that approaches. As the battle unfolds, Dabi watches the protagonist with a mix of fear and fascination. Su-hyeok moves with agility and violence, and Dabi starts to realize how much he resembles a monster in his ferocity. Dabi notices that Su-hyeok's life is now intricately linked to this fight. Su-hyeok reveals that this is his mission and that he has no choice but to fight and eliminate these enemies. Dabi watches emotionally as Su-hyeok faces each goblin with determination, even though the armored goblin remains motionless. When most of the goblins are defeated, Su-hyeok focuses on the armored figure. He mocks the goblin for staying passive, and the figure finally speaks. He praises Su-hyeok's skills for a human but claims that his death is inevitable now that they've crossed paths. The protagonist responds with mockery, but the armored goblin finally moves to attack. The armored goblin advances with his sword, forcing Su-hyeok to dodge with difficulty. Su-hyeok realizes that this challenge might be an opportunity for him to further improve his evasion skills. He dodges the attacks from the armored goblin, trying to find an opening to counterattack. Su-hyeok finally attacks with his sword, shouting words of challenge. However, the armored goblin uses his shield to block the attack, causing Su-hyeok's sword to break. Dabi enters a state of despair and screams, while Su-hyeok is shocked and vulnerable without his reliable weapon. The situation has reached a critical point, and Su-hyeok realizes that his determination and skills will be tested like never before. Su-hyeok, still dazed from the intense combat and the blow that nearly cost him his life, now faces a surprising challenge. With his sword broken, he remembers the poison dagger he took from the first goblin he killed. He draws the dagger and prepares to continue the battle. The armored goblin, visibly agitated, advances once again. Su-hyeok dodges the attack and notices a gap in its defense. He retaliates with the dagger, narrowly missing the goblin's neck from behind. However, the goblin manages to defend itself and knocks Su-hyeok down, preparing for a final strike. Determined not to be defeated, Su-hyeok fights with all his might and successfully brings down the armored goblin. With a decisive blow, he thrusts the poisoned dagger close to the goblin's throat, killing it and eliminating the imminent threat. As Su-hyeok recovers on the ground, he realizes he underestimated the tenacity of the goblins. The armored goblin begins to recite a healing spell, causing it to rise once again. Su-hyeok realizes that this is a paladin goblin capable of using healing magic. The armored goblin reveals that it is not an ordinary goblin and would have killed Su-hyeok if it were. Annoyed, Su-hyeok tells the goblin to shut up, but before he can act, the goblin faints again. Su-hyeok remembers that the dagger was poisoned, and the poison seems to be affecting the goblin. The armored goblin attempts to recite healing magic once more, but its strength fails it, and it faints once again. Seeing the goblin defenseless, Su-hyeok kicks its head, ending its life. He finally realizes that the mission to kill all enemies is still active and becomes confused by this. As Su-hyeok recovers, Dabi heals his battle wounds. Su-hyeok approaches Dabi, expressing his dilemma that he killed all visible enemies and still hasn't completed the mission. He jokingly suggests that he might need to kill Dabi to fulfill the mission. Dabi becomes terrified and pleads with Su-hyeok to believe him and not kill him. Su-hyeok quickly reassures Dabi, saying he's just joking. However, he starts to wonder if he left something alive or if there's a hidden challenge he hasn't realized yet. Su-hyeok reflects on the situation, considering all possibilities. He notices that the necklace Dabi wears is strange, as it doesn't come off despite his efforts to remove it. He looks at Dabi and makes a direct demand, asking for the necklace. Dabi resists, but Su-hyeok becomes furious and yells at him, threatening to kill him if he doesn't hand over the necklace. Dabi, frightened, gives the necklace to Su-hyeok. The protagonist takes his sword and breaks the gem of the necklace in half, an act of pure frustration and distrust. As the gem shatters, something unexpected happens. Dabi begins to glow with an aura of sinister energy and light. The surroundings change, and Su-hyeok realizes that something much more intricate and dark is happening with Dabi and that seemingly ordinary necklace. Su-hyeok looks at Dabi, enveloped in a bright light, and asks with curiosity, "You're still Dabi, right?" Dabi responds, his voice blending with the surrounding light, "Goblin Penrique extends his sincere gratitude to you, Su-hyeok." Su-hyeok becomes puzzled by the mention of Penrique and tries to understand the meaning of this unfamiliar name. As Dabi starts to speak, his words seem distant and unintelligible due to the intense glow surrounding him, leaving Su-hyeok bewildered and unable to hear clearly. At this moment, a system notification appears, indicating that the first floor has been completed and inviting him to enter the waiting room for his score to be calculated. Su-hyeok feels relieved and mutters to himself, "Finally, the necklace was the problem." He picks up the shield from the ground, noting that it's the Paladin Goblin's shield and realizes it has a healing spell. Su-hyeok smiles, teasingly calling the Paladin Goblin a sneaky cheater. As a reward for completing the mission, the system announces that Dabi will join Su-hyeok in the upcoming challenges. While Su-hyeok embraces and strokes the shield, Dabi observes with an air of perplexity, not understanding the human's attachment to the object. After these events, Su-hyeok is transported to the waiting room, with Dabi accompanying him. In the system, he's informed that he can now make contracts with first-class constellations, which will provide support through achievements and abilities. Remembering the promise he made to his friend, Su-hyeok decides to wait until the 5th floor to contract with more powerful constellations. As he drinks water and eats bread, Dabi surprises him by requesting food as well. Su-hyeok chuckles and shares his meal with the goblin, thanking him for his assistance. Curious about the goblin god Penrique, Su-hyeok questions Dabi, who reveals that Penrique is indeed a god. Intrigued, Su-hyeok asks if Penrique could be trapped in the necklace that Dabi wore. Dabi responds that he's not certain. Reflecting on the necklace and the presence of a god, Su-hyeok ponders the complexity of the situation. He asks Dabi if he's a constellation and if, by saving him, he brought a goblin god along. Dabi confirms yes and says that Penrique expressed his gratitude. Su-hyeok contemplates how he gained an unusual and powerful ally. While eating, Su-hyeok admits he's still at a low level compared to the tower's challenges. He also wonders about the progress of his friend Hee-young, considering she's a regressor and likely more advanced. The scene shifts, showing Hee-young lying on her bed. She reflects on her decision to become a first-class constellation on the 1st floor and whether it weakened Su-hyeok. Hee-young wonders if her actions affected Su-hyeok, thanks him for his protection, and motivates herself to prove that her choice was not in vain. She activates teleportation and heads to the 2nd floor of the Tower of Provocations. The scene returns to Su-hyeok and Dabi, who enter the 2nd floor. As they explore, they notice a fork in the path and a reduced time limit. Su-hyeok asks Dabi which path to choose, but Dabi is unsure. Dabi hesitates to ask Penrique, and Su-hyeok decides to take the left side. As they proceed, they realize time is passing quickly and they're on an endless path. They reach a steep location, and Su-hyeok decides it's best to turn back. But before they can act, a trap is triggered, causing Dabi and Su-hyeok to start running, driven by the instinct of imminent danger. The scene unfolds with Hee-young entering the cave, beginning her 2nd attempt on the 2nd floor. The path forks ahead of her, and she thinks to herself that, as a general rule, she should always go right. She regrets not choosing the status window, which made the tutorial difficult. Her mind is also preoccupied with the situation of Su-hyeok, her friend. Worried, she reflects on Su-hyeok's struggles facing enemies without a long-range weapon to deal with the boss. She wonders if he even realizes that she's concerned about him. A flashback takes her to a moment when they were drinking beer. She expresses contentment that Su-hyeok broke up with his ex-girlfriend, calling her a bitch and mentioning rumors of betrayal. Su-hyeok admits to being betrayed but confesses he still misses her. Hee-young understands the complexity of such feelings. Returning to the present, Hee-young continues to advance through the cave, questioning if Su-hyeok perceives her concern. As she ponders, she encounters a red-eyed orc with a green aura, something unusual. Ready for battle, she casts the spell Fire Order, making her magic staff glow and flames envelop her. She conjures a fireball towards the orc, hitting it and making it scream in fury, vowing to kill her for underestimating an orc. Amid the threat, the orc is struck with a precise punch. Hee-young confidently defeats it and orders it to shut up. After defeating the orc, she leaves it on the ground and moves forward, declaring that she'll see it on the 6th floor, mentioning Su-hyeok. The scene shifts again, revealing Su-hyeok and Dabi running in desperation. Su-hyeok observes that the path they chose doesn't seem to be the right one. He realizes that Dabi can't keep up with his running pace due to its short legs and lifts it to carry it on his back. While they continue to flee, Su-hyeok reflects on Dabi's useful abilities despite its foolish appearance. Su-hyeok appreciates that the goblin's skills can be valuable for various situations. He pets Dabi's head as a sign of gratitude, and Dabi expresses its thanks in return. However, Su-hyeok notes that Dabi, despite its peculiar appearance, is truly adorable. He suggests they choose the right path this time. Although Dabi ignores his suggestion and opts to go left, Su-hyeok thinks that there might be something hidden on this path, much like the necklace Dabi was wearing. Su-hyeok eventually agrees to go left. They reach the end of this path and come across a giant stone. Su-hyeok instructs Dabi to go back, stating he wouldn't blame the goblin for the situation. However, Dabi presses a piece on the ground, revealing a secret passage. Su-hyeok expresses surprise and admiration for Dabi's clever spirit. Excited, Su-hyeok enters the secret room and is amazed to see a statue holding a shining weapon. He realizes it's a mace, called the Great Orc Warrior's Thunder Mace. The weapon is embedded in a log and emits a brilliant blue aura. He prepares to grab it, but upon touching the weapon, the statue transforms into a furious orc. The orc, with fierce eyes, stares at the protagonist with a threatening expression. Standing at an imposing height of almost 2 meters, he wears chains that encircle his muscular body. An X-shaped scar adorns his chest, a mark of past battles. With a sudden movement, the orc charges at the protagonist, who reacts quickly, dodging with difficulty. The scene is tense, and the protagonist tries to remain calm as he observes the monster. He understands the seriousness of the challenge he's facing on the second floor of the tower. Taking a deep breath, he pauses and begins to think of a strategy. He notices that the orc's mace is closer to the monster itself than to him. A plan starts to form in his mind. As the orc advances to retrieve his mace, a wave of panic washes over the protagonist. He realizes that if the monster manages to wield that deadly weapon, the situation will become even more dangerous. His muscles tense up, and he raises his shield, preparing for the imminent attack. The orc grabs the mace, and a defiant roar escapes his throat. The mace glows with a menacing aura, and the protagonist braces for impact. He knows he can't dodge every attack, so he decides to focus on his defense, lifting the shield and resisting the brutal force of the monster. The impact is overwhelming, and the protagonist is thrown backwards with violence. He collides with the ground and rolls for a few meters, feeling pain in every inch of his body. He struggles to get up, realizing he's in a perilous situation. The orc is faster and stronger, and the electric shock from the mace has left his arm tingling. Despite the adversity, the protagonist maintains his determination. He knows he needs to find a gap in the orc's defense and exploit his weaknesses. As he recovers, he watches the monster's movements closely. The attack pattern is distinct, and he begins to outline a plan to face the enemy. However, before he can act, the orc advances once again, attacking furiously. The protagonist dodges in time, but he still feels the electricity in the air as the orc's mace passes dangerously close to his body. He realizes he needs a solid strategy to defeat the monster. He retreats, moving out of the orc's reach, and starts considering his options. He's at a disadvantage in terms of strength and speed, but he understands he needs to capitalize on the openings that the enemy's attack pattern provides. He studies the orc's movements, searching for an opportunity. Closely observing, the protagonist identifies a moment when the orc leaves an opening. He seizes the opportunity and advances, striking with precision. The orc's mace misses the mark, and the protagonist manages to inflict a shallow cut on the monster, causing it to momentarily retreat. Despite the success, the protagonist knows he needs more than a superficial blow to defeat the monster. The orc is enraged, and its menacing aura seems more intense than ever. The protagonist realizes he's facing a formidable opponent, and his heart races as he seeks a strategy to neutralize the threat. Amidst the intense battle, the protagonist starts taking more risks, taunting the orc to emotionally destabilize it. The monster falls for the provocation, charging forward in uncontrollable fury. The protagonist skillfully dodges the attacks, keeping his strategy in mind. During one of the orc's charges, the protagonist identifies an opening. With agility, he steps back and hurls his shield towards the monster's mace. The shield hits the weapon squarely, causing it to get stuck in the ground. The orc becomes momentarily disoriented, and the protagonist doesn't hesitate. He advances and delivers a precise blow to the monster's face, causing a gush of blood.